So, welcome everybody. Look at everybody pouring in. I'm so excited. So, this is Thursday of week 3 of ADHD Awareness Month. And if you have been joining all of this time, we've talked about a variety of topics related to ADHD and work, including therapy options, CBT and DBT, the differences between therapy and coaching. We've talked about workplace accommodations. We've had an organizer come in. There's just been so much content that's been shared over the course of the month thus far. But today we have a special guest. His name is James Douglas Jr. He is a marriage and family therapist, as well as an ADHD coach, right?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Yes. And he is going to join in a conversation today about ADHD, relationships, and work. I hope everyone is excited. Please share, like, follow, do all the things. Also, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat. I know all things ADHD and relationships is a hot topic. So we're looking forward to kind of getting some idea of what y'all also want to talk about during this particular conversation. But I mean, I half introduced James, but James, can you fully introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is James Douglas Jr. I'm a mental health and family therapist. I'm also an ADHD coach who likes to focus on youth, teens, adults, couples, and organizations. And I've been in the mental health space for about maybe even 15. Time flies.
Time does fly when you're having fun, huh?
Yes, oh my gosh, yes. Love it.
Yes. Um, that's so exciting. So, I mean, where do we even start, right? And so there's so many. Let's talk about some of the challenges that can pop up when you're thinking about ADHD and relationships. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so I actually made a list because one thing I've noticed is different challenges or struggles depending on the ADHD or the person with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start with the non-ADHD, common things I hear about their partner with ADHD. So a lot of like communication breakdowns, responsibility imbalance, the feeling of maybe feeling alone, uh,
Mm-hmm.
the lack of focus or attention from the partner, easily distracted, lack of starting task, impulsivity, attention, forgetfulness, never on time, demanding organization, and mood swings. That's like a common one. But for ADHD and the person living with ADHD, I hear a lot of maybe feeling like they're being nagged, not feeling understood, not feeling supported.
Mm-hmm.
That process, lack of, um, I guess, in a way, kind of feeling impatience from their partner, and at
Yeah.
times even sexual intimacy,
Oh, yeah.
trying new things.
Sex and ADHD, that's a whole other conversation. So can I add
Yeah.
something?
Oh, yes. Of course.
So I think one thing that I think when we think about like challenges in ADHD and relationships, we kind of think about um, some of the weaker executive functions that the ADHD is experiencing, and then how that impacts the partner, right? And then how that partner is feeling as a result of being having to deal with those weaker executive functions. But what I feel like one thing we don't talk about when it comes to ADHD and relationships, and I literally just thought about this right now, um, is everybody has weaker executive functions, right? And so if you are with a partner who is not neurodiverse, or I mean, could potentially be neurodiverse, but if you have opposite weaker executive functions, I think the other challenge is something that we feel as the ADHDer coming from the partner, because their weaker executive function may be our strength. And then
Hmm.
that drives us
Yes.
crazy.
Oh my gosh. Yes. That's a good one. Yeah, because even for myself personally, I think kind of upbringing for me has helped with my executive functioning
Mm-hmm.
and organizing. And it's not always like the best, but there are some areas that are a little bit stronger. And I notice in relationships for myself, weaker areas that I sometimes get frustrated with. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why can't this be easier? But I have to think remind myself of kind of we're all different aspects of executive functioning. Just skills in general.
Yeah, and so that's why, I mean, I made my husband do an executive functioning assessment before we before we got married. I was like, if I'm going to be doing an executive functioning assessment, you need to do one too. And so, you know, ours were completely opposite, right? And so the same feeling of frustration or annoyance when it comes to dealing with your partner's weaker executive function is it's felt the same on both sides, but I feel like there's always a lot of attention to the challenges that the ADHD person may be experiencing, like in general, and how that impacts the partner, but not always acknowledging that those same weaker executive, well, or different weaker executive functions that the partner has, but as our strength is also can be equally annoying sometimes.
I think it's also really important to remember that in a relationship or anything like that, you're a team. So, and that's kind of when the comes in. You have healthy communication about strengths and weaknesses, and you put them together, make that ultimate team that you're looking for. Because
Exactly.
ADHD, non-ADHD, we're not all perfect. No one's perfect. And in relationships, you have to kind of have that communication piece to be able to identify strengths and weaknesses to kind of move forward and achieve the goals that you guys have for yourself.
So communication, set goals, those are all key points when it comes to how to effectively work in a relationship with anybody, honestly. But when you're dealing with a neurodiverse relationship, those things are really crucial, and really understanding how each other's brain works. And so, like, you know, my husband and I, we try to focus on each other's strengths and like lean on each other's strengths. But it helped having a clear understanding of where we were starting and how our brains worked. And so it wasn't viewed as, oh, an excuse, or it wasn't viewed as like it. You don't take the actions or inactions personally.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's a big piece. Is your husband, I may ask, is he aware of what ADHD
Say
is?
that one
Like?
time.
Is your husband aware of what ADHD is? Kind of.
I mean, now he is, because I. So the good thing is that we ventured down this ADHD lane together, because I was diagnosed like right at the beginning of our relationship. So as I was learning, he didn't have any other choice other than to learn too.
And that's key, I think. A lot of the couples, at least that I've worked with, the non-ADHD are too familiar with ADHD, just about kind of what they've read, maybe seen on social media, not really understanding of kind of what that looks like. A lot of times it's taken personally if something were to happen, like you did, or if you maybe are getting my contact or kind of feeling like you're in the conversation with them when you're talking to them. So I
Mm-hmm.
think this is not really taking it personally, like you said. It's not.
Yeah. And learning together, and not
Yes.
expecting that learning process to be one person's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility within that relationship. And I mean, and I would argue that that extends to other people within your in your circle as well, right? And so it's like, I think it's important for everybody to really understand ADHD and how it impacts the relationships that you're having with them, whether or not it's platonic or romantic.
Yep. Very true. Yeah, 'cause a lot of friends do take it personally sometimes. That I've heard. Luckily, I don't think anyone's ever brought that up for me about the ADHD. I'm not getting back to them in a timely manner.
We did not talk about this beforehand, but it kind of just dawned onto me. Like, did you, as you know, as you learned about your own ADHD diagnosis, did you feel like you lost relationships because of it?
I don't. I think when I was learned more about it and was open with it, I think people were like, "Oh, it sounds yeah, it sounds like you." So I don't think like I lost any relationships, but I think people could see it. I just don't think it wasn't as talked about as much because I was diagnosed young. So I was diagnosed around 6 or 7 years old,
Oh, wow. Okay.
but it really wasn't talked about as much like it is now. So I'm
Yeah.
what it looked like, really.
Yeah. And you probably had like the privilege of being diagnosed as early just because you were a boy.
Yeah, very
Because we're
true.
diagnosed so much later in life for a variety of reasons, which we will talk about on another live. But going back to your list, like, what would you say that you see like the top 3 challenges, and then potential solutions you think we could come up with?
I would say the top three for me would be, I'm very big on communication. So I would say when you kind of dive deeper into relationships,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the communication, how they speak to each other, I would say that's probably number one.
Mm-hmm.
Being supportive, and I think that's both sides. So feeling supportive and getting the support you need to manage those challenges in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would say kind of the organization and planning.
Organizational planning. Okay. Which I wonder if like a lot of this really falls into the communication piece, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how important it is to be able to articulate your own needs. Well, when you said communication, a couple of things came up to me. Actually, one was being able to articulate your own needs. And then the other one, well, I guess three things. One is like, do you have a safe enough space? Or do you feel safe within that space in order to be vulnerable and to communicate your needs? And then the other thing was around how you communicate
Yeah.
and whether or not it's like, I mean, if I speak for myself as an ADHDer, I feel like sometimes my communication just can be kind of blunt, right? Like you just be like, listen, it is what it is, and the filter may not necessarily be there all the time. And so, but is that a type of communication style that can be received well within your personal or platonic or romantic relationships?
Yeah, I think it also even dives on early diagnosis versus later diagnosis. Like sometimes you might not be aware of some of the struggles that you're having to be able to even communicate that. And I think one of the things that I find important is being proactive with your ADHD and how that looks for you. Kind of going into the relationship or the situation, discussing this, whether it's platonic or romantic, and letting the other person be aware of kind of the challenges or struggles that you have versus waiting until it blows up and then, like the ADHD kind of causing this. And then, so it's really starting the relationship off with that communication, but it also requires that awareness too.
Yeah, and that made me think of a question that sometimes people ask me when it comes to ADHD and relationships is, do you tell your partner that you have ADHD?
Mm.
Or like, do you tell the person on like the first date that you have ADHD?
Yeah.
Um, what if I were to ask you that, what would you say?
I would say now, yes. 10 years ago, probably not.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like now there's not as, I mean, there's still stigma about it, but I feel like there's more people talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
And, I would say that like, depending on their reaction, that could decide whether or not you're going to have a first and a second date.
I feel like if I would have said 10 years ago, they'd be like, oh, and just blown over it because it's not really talked about, like really.
Mm-hmm.
It's really talked about. So I'm like, okay, thank you for sharing. But now it could maybe start a conversation because there is more information out there around ADHD and kind of what that looks like.
Yeah. And what's so interesting? So eventually we're going to connect all this to work. And I mean, we can even try to connect it to work now. But the reality is like this conversation is not that different than when you're thinking about your professional relationships too. And like asking yourself, how does ADHD impact your personal or your professional relationships? And how different really is that connection? Like, so when you said, like when we were talking about, do you tell your partner whether or not you have ADHD on the first date? That's the similar question that people ask me all the time. Like, when do I tell my employer that I have ADHD?
Yep.
Like that's a vital question. Like when you are working somewhere, like you're developing a relationship with somebody within the organization, with your manager, with your colleagues, with external partners. And so it's all about relationship building. And so if it's hard for you to get it at home, I would argue that it may be difficult for you to get it at work, or vice versa.
Yeah, I would definitely say, yeah, if it's not something that you're open with at home, I don't see it. Open with and being judged maybe at home, then I don't see people wanting to share that with their employers.
Hmm. And then, I would always argue that, like, I would always recommend people, if you want to access services at work, to disclose as soon as possible so that you're not putting yourself in a position to be negatively impacted by anything that may occur as a result of your ADHD when it comes to your work performance, right? And
Yeah.
so, like, not waiting until you're on a performance improvement plan, or like in a romantic relationship, not waiting until you're in front of a mediator or a marriage-friendly counselor to start talking about how ADHD is impacting your relationship.
Yes. Yes, I agree. And also, like when you fill out an application, there's that question on there. I'm pretty sure they added ADHD on there now. So, are people clicking there or not clicking? Maybe because it could affect them even getting the position. And
Yeah,
then,
and people are worried about whether or not they're going to be discriminated against, right, in the workplace. And that's it's the same feeling that you have in your own personal relationship, right? Like, these questions that you ask yourself, like, am I going to feel rejected by my partner because I have this diagnosis? Am I
yes,
going to be rejected by my employer because I have this diagnosis? And so, I would always argue, like, if you feel like you're going to be discriminated against, that in of itself is an area of concern.
yes, I agree. And also, kind of going into a workplace, I feel the dynamic is a little bit different. So I feel it starts from the organization and the company. Like they really need to increase their awareness of what that looks like,
Hmm.
what's in place, and make it an environment to be open to share about that and comfortable to do that.
Hmm. Yep, and creating inclusive workspaces.
Yes.
It's not as hard as people make it sound. Um, and, it does require leaders, and like a lot of leaders, really. It requires leaders to really step up and take a look at their policies, or hire somebody to take a look at their policies and practices. And it may require them to get an outside consultant, right? And so it's like, how can you help create a more inclusive environment? And that's everything from, what does your website look like? Does your website scream inclusivity?
Yep.
I mean, a lot of these websites do not.
Right.
Um, do your social media accounts? Like, every company has like a social media account. Like, are you practicing inclusive social media practices within your external social media accounts, right? What does your hiring process look like? Is that inclusive? And so there's so many different touch points when it comes to workplaces where they can shift in order to create inclusive environments. So when you walk in with ADHD, you're not viewed as an
Yeah.
outcast. And even though the reality is, it's like almost 70% of the workplace is neurodiverse, but nobody wants to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's always a challenge to start a new position, and you don't want to add that on top.
Yeah. And feeling like, you don't want to walk in, feeling like a burden as soon as you walk into a business, right? And I mean, it's the same thing. Like, and that's why we're talking about this. We're talking about it because, like, what people see in their romantic relationships and what people see within their professional relationships, I mean, I would argue that they're very similar, but just in different
Yes.
contexts.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's another relationship.
It is. Does anybody have any questions before we just keep talking about things? Can I ask the audience a question? How has your ADHD impacted your relationship, and how would you like us to help you with that? Can I do that? Am I allowed to do that?
Oh, for me?
No, just I wanted to see if anybody had any questions in the audience. If they had a particular question about how to navigate a particular challenge that they may be experiencing with their partner as it relates to ADHD. I don't see any questions, so we can just keep on talking. Um, so outside of communication, we talked about organization and planning. Um, when you said that, can you just kind of reiterate what do you mean? Like, what is the challenge? And then let's talk about some solutions.
Oh, that's a good one. So I guess if they're communicating about things that need to get done, the responsibilities, maybe they share responsibilities, have responsibilities, and the ADHD are kind of not following through with that, whether it's based on forgetting, um, planning appropriately, time management to get the things done. So yeah, that more in that on that focus.
Say that last part one more time.
More that focus in regards to the forgetfulness and the organization and planning.
Oh yeah, and people's houses are a mess.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're having some organizational challenges within your home, and then how does that impact your partner? Or in the context of work, like if you're having some organizational challenges within your office space or electronically, how are you able to access the materials that you need to be able to access in order to share and to work cohesively, like with your partners, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think if obviously there's coaching out now. A lot of people are kind of going out and seeking for support, whether it's individually or relationship. I think there's couples counseling to discuss and share and address those issues. I think it's really hard for if they're unable to identify what the problem is, like whether it's the ADHD getting worse, couple getting better, then it's always going to constantly be just a back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So one person or both people need to kind of take a step forward to kind of seek support, whether it's coaching or therapy, or even get a lot of information, reliable information as well.
I feel like you went in and out a little bit, but were you just talking about one person one person seeking support and then the other person not?
Yeah, I was saying one, like either the ADHD needs to seek support or both people together need to seek support, or even the person doesn't have ADHD. And sometimes that can get the person with ADHD to kind of jump in and, as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say everybody gets support, and do it individually and do it together. And then that made me think about like what happens when one person chooses to access support and the other person does not.
And having that conversation about it. Yeah, I think it's very important.
Yep, and reaching some type of agreement because otherwise it could go downhill really quickly. Somebody asked a question. I'm just going to scroll up. About rejection sensitivity dysphoria is something that definitely comes up in their relationship. Um, I would argue that the dysphoria part is debatable, but the rejection sensitivity that people feel is very real.
Yes.
Um,
And that kind of dives into the communication piece. Was
mm-hmm,
that how are you being communicated to? How are you managing rejection that you might feel?
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of that comes from, it can stem from many different things, but a lot of it, you got to educate yourself on it and kind of what that looks like for you. A lot of times, people I work with, it's hard for them to pinpoint the emotions that come up. So identifying their emotions that they're feeling from that conversation or that rejection. But I think once you're able to pinpoint that emotion, then it's easier to navigate kind of how you're feeling and explaining it to that other person about it.
I agree. And I would also say that one step before that is sometimes identifying the thought that is contributing to that emotion. Because you need to ask yourself whether or not how true is that thought you're having.
Yep. CBT. Yep. I love it.
Um, and we've been talking a lot about over the course of this month we've been talking about a lot of things. One, thoughts and emotions and emotional regulation when it comes to ADHD. But also a reoccurring theme is how well do you know yourself and how well do you know how ADHD is impacting your thoughts and your actions.
Mhm. Yes.
But yeah, I like this whole conversation around feeling rejected. And how to react in those things. And when you think about also naming emotions, before I forget, is, I like a good feeling wheel. Like if you're having a hard time being able to articulate how you're feeling, giving yourself, especially as an ADHDer who's like working memory is just a challenge anyway, and trying to recall like all these different emotions that you could be experiencing can be difficult. And I love a good feeling wheel. And so Google feeling wheel and the image will pop up. And sometimes just looking at the language can be helpful to help you identify what it is that you're actually feeling.
Oh my gosh, yes. There's a good one on calm. It's calm. Because I do the same thing. And it's touching on the primary and secondary emotions and really diving deeper into just mad, sad, happy, and really pinpoint what you could be feeling at that time.
Yeah. Get a visual. That's another takeaway. Get a visual to kind of help you better understand your own emotions.
Yeah.
Really also, but doing a little CBT on yourself, really, and really sitting there and trying to identify what thoughts are really driving those emotions and how true are those particular statements. Like, is somebody actually really rejecting you or no? Or is it a perceived rejection? I think it's important for you to understand the difference between the two. Welcome, everybody that are just joining. We are talking about ADHD and relationships, and feel free to jump in the chat and add any questions. Somebody had just asked about rejection sensitivity and about how that shows up in their relationship, and so we were just talking about that. Oh, and any strategies to navigate that. Do you feel like we answered your question, Hotfoot, around rejection? I think so, but if not, just let us know. We also talked about, okay, yes, great. You had also mentioned, James, about feeling supportive. What is that? What comes up for you when you say that?
So when I think of that, it's kind of going back to your piece of being vulnerable. Can you to share what you might be feeling? There might be some mood swings, up highs and lows, but are you comfortable enough to share what you're feeling with your partner, and even employer, versus keeping it inside and having it just build up and build up and build up?
Mm-hmm.
The partner, the HD, or maybe identifying and knowing when their partner is some type of way, and they're able to just ask how you doing, like how can I support you? How can I, talk about anything? So I think it kind of ties back into the communication, but feeling supported, I think it varies by person, by relationship, but I think it's important to have awareness of maybe some of your partner's traits.
Mm-hmm.
They have. A lot of times you can tell this feeling some type of way or not feeling up to par.
And so I think one of the strategies that could potentially be helpful with that is, I think you just mentioned it, but having a check-in with somebody. And so, when you think about that personally or professionally, like you should be having check-ins with people. And doing a check-in around how are you feeling, being able to create that space of intimacy with each other in personal relationship, obviously, but and creating a safe space for people to be able to just be open, and including like doing it intentionally, like putting time on the calendar and being intentional about creating some space for each other to talk about how you're feeling and be able to ask those questions, like what is coming up for you, what is some challenges that you're having, what could I be doing differently in order to be more supportive, how are you defining support today, because what support could look like today could be different tomorrow, what was different the day before. And so, these are questions that direct reports and managers can have too, right? And so it's during that check-in, like maybe it's like once a month, like let's check in around these projects. Like, how are you feeling about this? Is something coming up for you? What is difficult? What is going to be a challenge? Like, how can I help support you in that particular context. Um, um, so I think that would be a good
Yeah.
strategy.
Yes, I agree. Being intentional with it,
Mm-hmm.
I think, and you can feel it too. When you're getting support, you can feel it. You can definitely feel it.
Mm-hmm. But do you know what that feels like? Have you been in a place where you've been supported before, and do you know how that feels for you inside? Like,
Oh my goodness.
do you know where in your body it feels when you are feeling supportive? If that question made sense.
Yeah. For me, I would say I feel it in my heart. Like I don't know, I feel it in my heart and my mind. But I would say when someone's supportive, they you feel like they're on your side. They're there to help. So I would say definitely my heart.
Mm-hmm. And somebody asked a question. Do you think ADHD is sometimes used as an excuse for a relationship problem, or is it generally a root cause? I mean, he's not diagnosed yet. How can couples distinguish between the two? That's a good question. Do you want me to try to answer first?
Yeah, you go for that one.
So there's a couple questions in here. So do you think ADHD is sometimes used as an excuse for relationship problems?
It can be.
So I never think that ADHD should be used as an excuse. I think it's always an explanation. And so whether or not you know that you have ADHD or not, if there is something that is going on with you that can be explained, I feel like it's not an excuse. It's just an explanation. And so for example, with ADHD, like we've talked about some of the things, like there are some weaker executive functions. Like you will like an ADHD could do things impulsively. There may be a challenge with organization or a challenge with planning and prioritization. And so that's the reason. There's a neurological reason why those are challenges. And so it's not an excuse to keep doing it over and over again. So it's like once you know better, do better, right? And so if you have the option to then, like just as much as you have the option to be impulsive, you also have the option to learn how to control your impulsivity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think it really depends on kind of how it's being used as the excuse in the relationship as well.
Yeah. And then trying to distinguish between between doing something intentionally versus unintentionally. Um, I mean, I think when it comes to that, I think the person that knows, like if they know that they're doing something versus not knowing that they're doing something. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
some people will do things intentionally
Blame it on that.
and then blame it on the ADHD. And it's like, yes, you know that you have ADHD and you know that you're doing things impulsively. And so like what strategies are you putting in place in order to help support you with that?
Yep.
And not to say that it's going to be perfect every time because it's not, and not every strategy works every single time. But I think there's a difference between when somebody's trying versus not trying.
Right. Yeah. Like how do you decipher if it's intentional or not? And I think if it's something that's kind of around and then you talk about it, you explain, you share with your partner, are they taking steps to kind of improve and
Right.
trying to, because it can't be something that, oh, it was ADHD. So are they taking the steps to kind of manage that and work on it?
Yeah, because in like change and growth, like it doesn't happen overnight.
Overnight, yeah.
Like it doesn't happen within the second that you've had a conversation about it either. And so, but I think that there's a lot to be said for people that are putting in the effort to try to make things work, and try to do things differently and try to like learn more how to develop new habits. Um, and I think people need to get credit
Yeah,
for that.
I agree.
Yeah.
And being with them,
Say that one more time.
I think even asking them, would you like me to be with you in this process of seeking support or looking for support, whatever
Hmm.
that may be.
Yeah. And then, the other point that I wanted to talk about when it comes to support is people really need to understand what support means to them. And I think a lot of times people make statements like, oh, you're not supporting me. Or like, I wish that you would be more supportive. But then the person on the other end is like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I thought I was being supportive, but it's just speaking two different languages.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So identifying what support looks like to each person.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And recognizing that it can change.
Yes.
Be like, yeah, supportive for me meant X, Y, and Z last week. But today I need a different type of support. And so I need to be able to redefine that for you.
Yeah.
And then expect the other person to listen. Or write it down if you're not going to remember. Because I could come up for the ADHD too that's experiencing some working memory challenges. Um, like the partner told you what support meant. They probably told you 10 times. But what strategies are you putting in place that you actually remember it?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Because that can come up too. I like these questions. Keep them coming. Because there's so much that we could talk about when it comes to ADHD and relationships.
Yes.
Did we not talk about any of your other points that you had talked about at the beginning? I didn't write them all down. I just wrote the three. Because you had a long list.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, my list.
Can you reiterate your list for the new people that are on?
Yes. So for non-ADHD, I hear a lot of communication breakdowns, responsibility imbalance, feeling alone, not able to focus, tension, easily distracted, impulsivity, attention, following through, or the lack of following through, attacks, mood swings, support, feeling supported, lack of understanding, sexual intimacy, and patience. I think an interesting one is for me is the responsibility imbalance. So sometimes I hear a lot of parent-child relationship. It feels like a parent-child relationship
Mm-hmm.
versus two adults or adult child versus two adults.
Yeah, that is a that is a big one. And I may be saying that because maybe that's a conversation that I've had in my own household. um, but just being honest, and I think that that does come up a lot too, because it can feel like you're, especially if organization is a weaker executive function, or what did the other guest talk about? Is it flittering? I think that's the term that she used, where you kind of, as an ADHDer, you start one task and then you get distracted by something else, and then you get distracted by something else, and then eventually you may or may not get to the original thing that you started with. But in a result, you may be leaving a trail all around the house of unfinished projects.
Yes.
And then you have the partner that's either watching you or comes home to it.
Yeah.
And then either they see it and get frustrated by it, or they pick up after you essentially. And then that other person putting that other person in a position where they could potentially feel like they are cleaning up after you, can be hard.
Yeah. Yeah. My biggest one was leaving cabinet doors open.
As I look at the open cabinet door in front of me right now, is that what you're saying? That's literally the cabinet door is open in front of me right now. I will close it though.
And I think that's another key point, because so when you have a few of the challenges that someone with ADHD might have that can be worked on with a coach or therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a few that should be kind of discussed with kind of the partner as well, or have that partner space with you, so both people receiving support. And I think in regards to, well, that's definitely one both should probably talk about, because that's like communication is probably support, lack of support. But there's things like forgetfulness or attention, like that might be something that's impossible versus kind of both people needing to kind
Yeah.
of do that thing.
But I do also think it's based on, I do think that it's the individual that feels annoyed's responsibility to readjust the way that they're thinking about it as well. Because if you're annoyed by it, I feel like that's a question you need to ask yourself, like, why does this annoy me?
Mhm.
Like,
Oh,
why does it bother me so much that it's making me feel a certain way? And
you mean like the
not
yeah,
put that blame on the other person.
okay, yeah. You mean the person that doesn't have ADHD?
Yeah, the person that does, if you're in a neurodiverse relationship, yeah, the person that doesn't have ADHD, it's like if the cabinet door is open, like, why does it bother you so much to just close it
Right.
or just see it open, you know? And so I feel like if something is, if you start to feel, and then this is what any, really with anybody, like if you're starting to feel annoyed by something, asking yourself, like, why is this so annoying to me?
Yeah, that's self-reflection.
Yeah. I think that self-reflection is important. In general, I feel like a lot of people were relating to the fact that they've been walking around the house with like 10 different projects.
Yeah.
Another one that
Mhm.
comes up like that's another example of that is laundry.
That's a top one. The top. Probably, that's the top. Yeah, I would say it's definitely the top. Mm-hmm. I would show you the basket right now, but well,
Yeah, laundry is a big one. Also, or just putting the laundry in the wash and then kind of forgetting about it. But I think it's helpful, like, and again, you know, this all really goes back to communication, right? And so it's like having those conversations with your partner. Like, I will put the laundry, like saying, like being honest, like I will put the laundry in and I will forget about it unless I put in certain strategies in order to ensure that I don't forget about it, right?
yep.
Especially if it's on, like, you know, if it's in the basement or it's just on a floor that you're not on the regular basis, if your machine is really quiet and doesn't make any noise, it's going to be out of sight, out of mind. And that's just, that's a working memory challenge that you will experience with ADHD. And so it's like, it's a legit challenge. And, and so like, how do you work with your partner and help navigate that particular challenge? Like, do you guys have a plan to say, like, listen, I will put the wash in, and then you put the clothes in the dryer, and then by the time I remember that the clothes need to be put in the dryer, they actually are already dried, and then I can just take them out and put them in a basket. You know what I mean? And so, how are you guys working together as a team in order to make sure things are getting done?
Yes. Timers, setting timers, letting the person know that you put it in. I really like that. Like, I put it in, you change it, I fold it. And then
Mm-hmm.
also the body the wrong way. So maybe taking the time to be intentional with it and doing it together. And then also you have time with your partner,
Mm-hmm.
which is definitely good.
Yeah, like somebody just says, like, he does the laundry, but I'm supposed to put it away, and I just don't. How can I work on making sure I keep up with my chores? I mean, I have a couple of thoughts here. One, maybe that's not the chore for you. Like maybe there's another part of the process of laundry that you can do instead. And maybe it's time to revisit that conversation about who's going to be doing what in different tasks. You always have the option. You always have the option to revisit decisions.
Yep.
I feel like sometimes people make a decision and it's like, oh, I made a decision. Okay, we'll just make a new one.
Yeah.
I
I
don't feel
agree.
like there's anything wrong with that. And that's the whole point of assessing. Like, I mean, even in going back to relate this to work, um, thinking about, so let's say you ask for work accommodations and like it's supposed to be an interactive process. You ask for work accommodations, they gave you those work accommodations, and then everybody is supposed to assess whether or not those are working or not. And if they aren't working, then you say, these aren't working. Let's revisit them. And it's the same thing in the household. Like, I'm supposed to be folding these clothes. Clearly, I'm not folding them. And I don't, like, no matter how many strategies I put in place, I'm not folding them. So, like, maybe the folding is not my responsibility anymore.
Yep. There was one technique that someone said that they said worked pretty well was associating something that they enjoy with the folding. So maybe they have a favorite Netflix show or a TV show. Kind
Mm-hmm.
of pair that with the folding. to be able to kind of follow through with that. But you're doing something you enjoy, but also try not to get distracted with that other thing because it could still take away from the folding.
Yes, there are things that can help you actually get the folding done. But I think my overall point was like, you don't have to necessarily have to be the one to do the folding if it's not working. But I do like the idea of associating it with the show. I do like, I mean, people body double to try to get things folded.
Yep.
I give myself a 3-day limit where I'm like, okay, I have to have a come to Jesus conversation with myself and be like, okay, I've reached my 3-day limit.
Mhm.
Like, how many times can I dig in this basket looking for socks when I can just put the socks away?
Yeah. Sometimes it could even be the time management. Maybe you don't have enough time.
Mm-hmm.
Because got to estimate properly how long you think this might take, and then be intentional with setting that time to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. She said, I'm only supposed to put the clothes away. He folds the laundry. He does everything else. I mean, what's wrong with him than just putting them away? I guess I'm having a hard time understanding and why do you have to be part of this process?
Okay. I wonder how long it would take to put them away.
Um,
Maybe next time, time yourself and see how long it actually takes to put the clothes away.
yeah, you could also gamify it, make a game out of it.
Yep.
Um, that helps. Yeah, a timer, like try to beat the timer, or I like to bake, so bake something, and you know that like while the item is baking, then that's the time that you put your clothes away.
Oh, I like that.
Um,
Self after.
yeah, so if there's like some downtime in between another task, be like, well, I only got 15 minutes, so let me use these 15 minutes to put these clothes away before the timer on the stove and stuff goes off.
Yep.
Um, but you do know you have to make it fun because the ADHD brain is all about like what's interesting for you at the moment. And so how can you make this fun?
Yep. Bigger the list, but it might vary by day.
Yeah. And then I mean you could also go the CBT route and being like, okay, what is really getting in the way, or like what thoughts are you having about folding laundry that's positioning you to not do it. So that's the other method. You could do some thought work there too.
Very true.
Um, so you have options. You have options to not do it at all. You have options to challenge your thoughts and emotions that you're having about folding the laundry. You can gamify it. You can add it to a task that you already enjoy. So you have some options. I hope that's helpful. Whatever. Oh, we only have a few more minutes actually.
Time flies.
Yeah, time does fly. I hope y'all are enjoying this. There's so much to talk about when it comes to ADHD and
Yeah.
relationships, because there's so many challenges. But I really wanted to be able to correlate it to work a little bit because it can be just as challenging to navigate relationships in the workplace as it is within your romantic life.
Yes.
Um, and the thing about, like, let's say you went on a date with somebody, right? And it just kind of was a disaster. Like, you don't ever have to see that person again. But at work, it can have different consequences when it comes to addressing and managing challenging relationships. And so it's important to understand the complexities that can be involved with managing relationships with ADHD and be really intentional about addressing those challenges. Because in the workplace, it can really impact, I mean, it can impact your money, right? Like it can impact your whole family and your lifestyle. Um, and it can make or break some things at work. Um, And so you just want to be aware of the consequences for not addressing some of the challenges that can come up with managing relationships with ADHD.
I agree.
But let's actually just end now, if that's okay. So thank you for joining this conversation. Thank you, James, for coming and having this conversation with me, really honestly, about all things ADHD and relationships. And I feel like we should probably do something else together around this work. And so I'll talk to you offline about that. But for those that are listening, just a couple things that are coming up. So tomorrow we're going to be having a special guest as well, and she is going to be talking about her entrepreneurial journey and addressing some of the challenges that have come up with her and how she's addressed it with like virtual assistants, for instance, with ADHD. So we'll be talking about that. And then next week, the calendar is going to be coming out, but we have a nutritionist coming in next week. We're going to be having some more conversations about ADHD and leadership. And I don't have the calendar in front of me, but we will be posting it tomorrow about what's happening. So please stay tuned and always go to my profile and set the notifications. It's up in the right-hand corner to make sure that you never miss an event. And then tonight, I'm actually doing some group coaching for women with ADHD. So it's not too late to get your ticket if you want to join the conversation tonight. And then next week, I'm having another group coaching session as well, but those links are in my profile in my bio. So the group coaching is fun. So if you have a challenge that you want to get addressed, please feel free to join. And what else is coming up? I do have a new coaching program that's going to be coming out soon too. So I hope that everybody's excited to hear more about that. But that is it. I hope that you enjoyed everything. And thank you again, James, for coming. I really appreciated that insight and to be able to have a dialogue with somebody else in the mental health field around navigating some of the challenges that we experience as ADHDers.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Thank you. And I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.